Hello, everyone, and welcome to No Offseason presented by Mass Mutual. I'm Zena.
And I'm Chantel Jennings.
Today on the show, the NCAA women's basketball season is officially over. The nets have been cut, and we all know by now, UConn came out on top. But that's not the only story worth talking about before we switch over to the WNBA draft, which is coming up incredibly too soon. We are going to still linger in the college basketball space just a little longer. We're going to look ahead to next year's big teams and big players, check in on the transfer portal, and reflect on our favorite moments from this past season. But first, we got to give credit where credit is due and give a shout out to the winner of our No Offseason Bracket Challenge, LeVar.
Ooh,
congratulations.
Good job, LeVar.
You beat all of us. You took all of our notes and put them to good use. You came out on top over 250 people. So hats off to you. Congrats. And also to everyone who participated with us. We appreciated our little No Offseason bracket family. And yeah, you guys all killed it. Way more.
It kicked our butts. I feel like everyone that actually is on this podcast finished in like the bottom 20th percentile. I forget if it was you or Sabreena that said this, that was like, I'm choosing to look at it as like, we were so informative that everyone else. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, Zena, I appreciated the way you put a spin on that because that was,
of course.
Made me feel a little better.
Everyone else do better.
Yeah.
Including you, Chantel, because you were writing. I mean, unbelievable stories on Paige and her final 40 minutes. Unbelievable story on Gino. I mean, you've been at it. How are you feeling now post-tournament, now that, you get a little bit of time to rest before the rest of WNBA starts up?
Yeah, and the offseason. And this is going to be a busy offseason in college sports and women's college basketball. I think we're already seeing that with some surprising coaching moves and the transfer portal and decisions coming down from government that are going to impact women's sports and women's college basketball. I am tired. I don't know when you got home yesterday, Zena. I don't know if your flight was delayed like mine, 3 hours out of Tampa.
No way.
Yeah. I think people that were flying north or east had to go through sort of a storm situation. I think those of you who are flying more west did not. But yeah, it was nice to get home, sleep in my own bed. It's been a minute since that's happened. See my kids, see my dog, like that was great. But it's sort of like back to it this morning. I woke up and I always enjoy rewatching the broadcast of the national title game because like you were in the arena and this, like there's stuff you miss, like
correct.
And you can sort of it challenges the way you saw the game in some ways or like validates it. Just like watching back and seeing things, and they bring on different voices and experts and even interviews and stuff. And getting a chance to see like even Holly Rowe's halftime interview with AZ Fudd, where I think Holly told AZ, Sarah has 11 interviews or has 11 rebounds. She was like, and it was like, you were also surprised by that, like how well she played in the first half. Like, so just sort of those things where it's like, we were across the court. I was probably like 20 feet away from that interview, but didn't see her face, didn't know what was said, those sort of things. So never that far away from the grind, but sort of taking a moment to catch my breath. What about you?
Good. I mean, yeah, I got home with no issues until it came down to finding my car in the airport parking garage.
Oh.
Yeah, I went through all 5 levels. I did. And then I looked back at the picture.
Low beeper?
Yeah. I was just rolling around. I think I got 10,000 steps in that hour alone.
Hey, good for you.
I was searching for my car. So the exercise happened, but man, finally home, got to watch a little bit of the full NCAA men's championship game. And Houston, heartbroken for them. It was very different on the men's side in terms of the final outcome. Very close game. Shout out to Florida for winning and coming back. But I'm happy you mentioned, just the offseason grind and things still going to be very busy this offseason. We saw 2 huge transfer portal updates. Olivia Miles from Notre Dame going to TCU. And then Tanaya Latson, #1 scorer in the country this year for FSU, Florida State, committing to South Carolina. So that's just a few of the portal transfer updates of all of the transfer portal updates that we're going to have over the course of this offseason. But another big piece of news was one of the biggest stories of the day. It's the House versus NCAA lawsuit and settlement. And this is going to have huge implications for colleges and college athletes. The whole concept of amateurism is about to be annihilated. This is talking about how athletes are compensated and so much more. Interestingly, the final hearing of this case was like down the street from me in Oakland, California. And it's actually a trio of lawsuits. And this took place in a federal court in Oakland, California. And it was supposed to be decided upon on Monday, but the judge in the case, Claudia Wilkin, basically told the parties, everyone involved, the NCAA, the lawyers behind the defendants, of the plaintiffs, like everyone, she had some questions. She wants people to go back, work on them, and in a week, come back and present. So, Chantel, can you fill us in on the basics of all of this?
Yeah. So this is, we've been talking loosely about this on the podcast. I think this is sort of the, I don't even know if we'd call it like the game within the game. It's sort of like the backdrop of the game this year, right? Because it's like
Yep.
everything that has to do with NIL and pay for play and, like you said, amateurism, and sort of coming back to that word of like college sports versus pro sports. And I think all of us who are in this space, and you work in the NBA and women's college sports, so you sort of see both sides of it. Like women's college sports is and has been inching closer and closer to the pro model in a lot of ways. And now we're seeing more teams hire straight out GMs and stuff like that, college teams. And so the House settlement, it's, I was talking to someone, they're like, why is the U.S. House of Reps deciding this? And I was like, no. It's a former Arizona State swimmer named Grant House.
Yeah,
but
right.
I can understand
Exactly.
why people might be confused. So it is a case, and it's actually a trio of cases that were brought, but Grant House brought a case against the NCAA in 2020 seeking basically back pay, for lack of a better word, for athletes who participated in NCAA sports before they had the opportunity to make NIL money. And so understandable that these athletes who are now sort of seeing people that they may have been teammates with make money off their name, image, and likeness, and wondering why they missed out on that opportunity. And so the NCAA, it behooved them to settle, because if they lost this case, they could have owed up to $20 billion, I've seen estimates of. And so they had this settlement. And so it's basically trying to figure out like how much is due and to whom and where and all of that. But, sort of the broad strokes of it is that NIL payments are going to be made to former student athletes dating back to 2016. It'll be over about a decade period. It's going to go roughly...
Just missed that cutoff.
I know. I wish that you and your Yale teammates would have been a part of this, although some will.
Okay.
Some will.
There you go.
But largely to college football, 75% to college football, 15% to men's basketball, 5% to women's basketball, 5% to other sports. But this also sort of institutes this revenue sharing plan, which is something we've talked about a lot on the podcast that I've been talking to coaches about. In general, I will say my main emotion is like, damn, I wish I would have made it more than a day of Econ 101 at Michigan my freshman year, because probably would have been helpful in understanding all of this. But I only made it a day there. But it's like I've talked with coaches, and they're like, do you know what's going on? What are you hearing? How is all of this going to break down? And the long and short of it is that athletes are going to get paid directly by their universities. So, this idea of like, imagining a world where this all used to happen under the table, and I'm not saying that's going to go away either, but this will now happen out in the open. Colleges will have a chance to spend up to a certain amount of money. This year it's going to be about $20.5 million, up to that amount. But as we heard from different coaches, including Gino, over the weekend, schools are going to go over that. There's not firm penalties yet. Cheating has existed in college sports forever. There are going to be people who stretch those limits continued into the future. But basically how all of this gets broken down is something that we're seeing in college sports right now, that those schools that have the big deals for football specifically, because that is the big money driver in college sports. We know that. College football is the reason why the Pac-12 doesn't exist anymore. And so it's the majority of this money is going to go to college football. And so Georgia has already come out and said that they're going to follow the House settlement numbers. So 75%, 15, 5, and 5 for football, men's basketball, women's basketball, other sports. And I think there's an assumption that a lot of other schools will follow suit. I've talked to women's coaches who say that they've been told by their supervisors that they will receive the same amount as their men's programs. So that will be interesting. And sort of this will become an expansion of the haves and have-nots in college sports. And you look at different athletic departments across the country, like Ohio State, Alabama, Michigan, Texas, like these are all programs that their athletic department revenues are above $210 million. Like they will be able to find the money. You look at other athletic departments and you wonder, where are you going to find $20.5 million? You think of, and sort of how it all breaks down, like UConn, for instance. When we think of UConn, we think of basketball, men's and women's. They've had championships for those programs in the last few years. Their athletic department revenue is $99 million. But is that a program that needs to spend 75% of its rev share money on a football team? Probably not. But their total athletic department revenue isn't that far off UCLA and Oklahoma State, where it's like those are programs that are in conferences that might care a little bit more about their college football teams and are spending more money on their college football teams. And you think their revenue share breakup might be a little bit different. So I think it'll be interesting to see how all of this breaks down. We're sort of in this wait and see period. And even once it happens, it will happen. All the coaches I'm talking to are still sort of in that, like, well, we'll see how it goes. Like, I don't think anyone feels like this is going to be settled immediately or that everyone is going to figure it out immediately. And the last part of this too is that, which we had talked about in Tampa, the NIL part of this, that those, basically the pay to play that has existed in college sports and women's college basketball over the last few years, any deal now over $600 is going to be regulated by the NCAA, which let's see how that goes. The only people I sort of, trust less to run college sports than the NCAA is the U.S. government. And so like all of these different sort of things and different actions that are being taken because of lawsuits, I'm like, well, let's see how it goes. It'll be run by Deloitte. I know you and I had talked in Tampa that like at least it's being run by Deloitte, which is a company that has that financial knowledge and an overlap in sports. But yeah, I think we're kind of in a wait and see period. It's a lot. Like I said, this probably feels like an economics lecture at this point, but it's kind of going to feel like that for a while just because no one really knows what's going to happen. And we can also get into it later. Hopefully we can have some of the reporters who've spent more time following these cases and settlements more closely. But like roster limits have come up too. That was a big part of Monday's hearing. How that impacts football specifically and baseball actually are more impactful, it sounds, than basketball. But it's still a part of the settlement that's going to change sort of how we look at women's basketball.
Wow. Thank you for all of that. That's like, this is going to be huge. I was reading about this in preparation for this, and I agree with Chantel. Definitely go check out the site, guys. Stuart Mandel specifically wrote about this and has been following this case since 2014, when the original cases around name, image, likeness with O'Bannon, a former basketball player from the UCLA, brought this to light in the sense that, he was complaining about NCAA basketball video games were making money off of his name, image, and likeness, and he wanted to make money off of it. And now it has transpired into what we see today. Now, there's so many elements about this that was so interesting. So like, as Chantel mentioned, $20.5 million are allowed to be, or will be allowed to be distributed. How do they come up with that number? It is 22% of the Power Five conferences' average athletic income or like revenue. So every year, if they make more money, and these schools are already, some of them, I think it was Tennessee, that's charging extra dollars on concessions and tickets,
calling it a talent fee.
Right? And so if these schools keep making money, that number will continue to go up, which is great. But one of the things that Stuart Mandel mentioned is that in the first year that this happens, some of these schools might not be able to hit 20.5 million, right? Because they just don't have that kind of money. But it also is important that, like, as Chantel, you're mentioning, that 20.5 million is different than NIL dollars. So it's not as if, before, and Chantel, you explained this to me well in Tampa, which is like, if a booster, some random person that is an
part
alum
of a collective,
of a school and part of a collective, if Chantel plays for my alma mater and I've got $1 million to spend on her and I want her to come to my alma mater, before I could just do that and say it was
through
worth
the collective
$1 million
without any oversight.
through the collective, without any oversight. Now, that has to be ran through and approved by Deloitte. It's over $600. They have to evaluate if that is worth Chantel's value
the
to
fair
be
market
paid this
value.
amount of money, the fair market value to be paid this amount of money. That doesn't mean that Nike can't go do a deal with Chantel or, In-N-Out can't go do a deal with Chantel. It just means that those dollars from Nike and In-N-Out also have to be ran through by, by Deloitte. So this is huge. And the reason why this is big for women's basketball is because, as Chantel mentioned, a lot of this has been predicated for years on football teams. How well are the football teams doing? But Chantel, as you know, women's basketball is creeping up in that men's basketball, football conversation. Probably never going to be on the college football level, but definitely higher than the Olympic sports and the kind of non-revenue generating kind of sports. South Carolina, making a ton of money. UCLA, making a ton of money. So when you think about the growth that women's basketball is having, how much do you think that growth is going to impact the level of voice they get in this conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I think back, Dawn Staley has really spoken about this a lot over the last few years. Like, when she talks about it, she says, we are a sport that was intentionally held back. Like, everyone else got to start the race, and women's basketball was like held back and got a 10-meter slow start because of, everything. Go back and read the Kaplan report and just see the ways that the NCAA prioritized. I mean, I think this is a direct quote from the Kaplan report, prioritize the men's championship overall. And that includes women's college basketball. And you sort of see, as women's college basketball is given the opportunity, long past having earned it, to go out and show what they're worth. And we still haven't seen an individual media rights deal. While we were in Tampa this weekend, both Dawn Staley and Gina Auriemma called for that it's time to put the women's basketball tournament up for the highest bidder on its own. Don't wrap it with all the other sports. The men's championship is on its own. The women's is wrapped with 30 plus other championships. Let women's basketball stand on its own so that women's basketball can show what it's worth. And so I think it's with everything with women's college basketball, people are skeptical, and I think that's smart. I think it's prudent. I think it's if you're not skeptical, you haven't been paying attention, I guess, because to believe that everything is going to go well because the sport is on the up and up right now sort of feels like, oh, are you just ignoring literally, let's go back to when women's basketball became an NCAA sport. It became it because literally the NCAA fought its inclusion for so long to run it as a championship. And so I will say, going back to what we were saying about collectives in terms of legitimate deals, sort of the Nikes, the Gatorades, the, State Farms of the world. When I was talking with Charlie Baker, the NCAA president, earlier last month, he said that, he's not worried about those deals. If State Farm wants to pay JuJu Watkins, they're already partners. If they want to pay her a lot of money, he's not worried about that, what he's more worried about are sort of the shady dealings, as he described them, those deals where people are saying, come to my school, and they're talking over social media apps and nothing's ever legit, basically. And he said that he had talked to a lot of athletes who had committed to a school or gone to a school under the assumption that these were legitimate people and legitimate deals, and they just weren't. And that a lot of athletes, he said, haven't talked about those because they feel embarrassed that they sort of got duped. And so his hope is that with this clearinghouse, those deals will be weeded out. We'll see. I think there's many sides to every story. And I think there are also players and coaches that are sort of, Like, who's to say that Deloitte knows the fair market value perfectly of a women's college basketball player and how that differs in different markets at different universities? You know, a women's basketball player at UConn versus a women's basketball player at a smaller school that doesn't have sort of the history. A women's basketball player at South Carolina versus, you know, I live in Minneapolis, a women's basketball player at Minnesota. But, you know, those players that are still the star at a smaller school might have a ton of value or worth in sort of that community. Even if it's not seen on a national stage, even if someone from Deloitte might not see that. So
Right.
I don't know. I talked to everyone about this, and every coach is like, it's just going to end up in a billion more lawsuits. Like, we're like the NCAA is going to be in court for forever.
Yeah.
So we'll see. We'll see. I think we'll be talking about this for a while.
Right. I was going to say, it's a touchy topic. It is still, as we mentioned, the settlement has not been approved. And all of this, the $20.5 million, all of that cannot take place or be enacted until it is. So kind of hold your breath on this one. Think about, if you're thinking about recruits and things of that sort, it's not going to just be who can get championships. It's going to be how good is your football team? And also how bought in is your fan base.
Well,
and your athletic department as well.
Zena, that's a great point. Like, I think what I'm, and we can move on soon because again, we don't want this.
Yes, I was going to say, we do have to wrap.
We're not a money podcast yet. But I think this is going to be really interesting because there's been there's been a groundswell of support for student athletes to get paid for a very long time. If that means your season tickets are going up as a fan, are you still going to be as on board with that? If that means that it's your soda and your popcorn and your Skittles when you go to the game, like, if those go up, but ultimately it's feeding the program that's paying the players, that's generating the revenue, like, I think we're entering a very, very interesting time in college sports.
There you go. We'll leave it on that one. Now, while the frenzy of the tournament subsides and before WNBA season really heats up, we want to pause and kind of take stock of where things stand for women's college basketball. We've got some already way too early power rankings up on the site. Shout out to Sabreena Merchant. She's already got her power rankings. I don't even know how you start that conversation already, but I love this breakdown, going team by team and explaining why some teams were at the top versus some others, people that are rising in the ranks versus others. And one of the biggest things was the transfer portal. Like, thinking about teams that have returners, are returning young talent, are returning good talent, and then people that depleted, right? So let's start with the ones that are rising. And a lot of them are the ones that have young talent that are returning. I'm looking at Michigan, Silas Swords, looking at Vanderbilt, Michaela Blakes, looking at Minnesota. I mean, these are teams that had some youth last year in Minnesota winning the WBIT. Shout out to them. I don't know if we've given them that prop yet, but these are teams that are going to be returning talent. What are your thoughts on some of these teams that are rising through the ranks, Chantel?
Yeah, I think, like you said, those risers are sort of teams that have been able to keep their players out of the portal. There are also some fallers, which we will get to, which are largely predicated on teams that have lost players to the portal. But the risers, it's the Michigans of the world. And I think we've said that, where it's like, if they could keep that trio of freshmen together, they'd be in pretty good shape. I think they still probably, I assume that Kim Barnes-Rico is in the portal as we speak, looking for a big, because that sort of feels like one missing piece for them. They lost their big, Yulia Grabaskaya, to the portal. I don't know if she's committed anywhere yet. I haven't seen anything, but she could come back. Going into the portal doesn't necessarily mean you can't go back to your school. You can opt back in if there's still a roster spot, if the coaches will still have you. And they also lost Jordan Hobbs, who, that sort of stretch four for them. But they need to add a little bit more there. But I think that sort of freshman class where it's like, we figured they were on the up and up. Same thing with Minnesota. They'll get Mara Braun back from injury. That's huge, like to win the WBIT without your best player. We look back at seasons past where you think of an Arizona, which the year before they made it to the national championship had a deep run in the WNIT. Like, these teams that use that postseason experience can retain their core and come back the next year. It's huge Same thing with Vanderbilt. Such, Michaela Blakes and Shea Ralph were on this podcast earlier this season. To retain Michaela, keep her there. Camille Pierre, they have a really good core. And now they have the tournament experience, right? And they'll come back hungrier. So I think there are those teams where you sort of look at the top of Sabreena's rankings and it's yep, basically the Final Four from this year.
Yep.
Which all of those teams, lose some players, but bring back a lot, whether it's through the portal or their own players. But there are some teams outside of that obvious grouping that could make a run for the Elite Eight next season.
Absolutely. And you talk about Michigan's core three. I just want to make sure we say their names too for those that are kind of new to the space, like Olivia Olsen, Mila Holloway, and Skylar Swords, just phenomenal athletes. And then I love the way you said that the top four that were at the Final Four this year, of course, UConn, South Carolina, let me not say USC, South Carolina, Texas, and UCLA. UCLA returning a lot of their talent. Some interesting thoughts going into next year, considering the way that they performed at the Final Four this year. Texas definitely having a solid crew. You saw Jordan Lee go off in the Final Four game when her team needed her the most. Of course, Madison Booker has been a phenom for them overall. Right now, it's they need a shooting presence. I love the way Sabreena put it when it comes to South Carolina. They don't, re-recruit or they reload
right
each year. They reload.
Her ranking came out. She has the Gamecocks at number 2, and that came out before Tania Latson committed to the Gamecocks.
And there you go. I was just going to mention, that's huge. That's
the strong
huge.
get stronger.
The strong get stronger, okay? And so now, I'm going to put this out there. This is my speculation, but I'm looking at Tania Latson, number 1 scorer, coming into South Carolina. Where does that put Mylasia Fulwiley?
I don't know.
And that's a question of, now I'm like, is Fulwiley going to stay? And find her space alongside of Tania Latson, or does she want to go and kind of run a show elsewhere? So that's going to be interesting to see for South Carolina. But they've got, tons of talent outside of that anyways. So
well, and we had talked on our championship show about the fact that what they were lacking this year was sort of that go-to scorer. And every championship team that Dawn Staley has had that go-to scorer in the form of a post player. We think of South Carolina, post U, they've just churned out those incredible post players. But now you come into the backcourt, and this makes me feel like Raven Johnson is going to stay. She walked at senior day, I believe, but has her medical red shirt, that she can use. She and Tania played high school basketball together for a bit. You'd have to think that relationship really played into Tania's decision to go there. So at this point, just putting 2 and 2 together, it'd feel weird for Raven to leave to, if Tania came, if that was a part of her decision. But yeah, I mean, I think the Mylasia question is a good one. South Carolina has done an excellent job of players sort of buying into the process, understanding the process, loving the process, and then, developing through the years. And Mylasia is someone that, I thought before Te-Hina Paopao had made a decision about this season, she'll be in the starting 5 next year. She should be in the starting 5 next year. Te-Hina comes back. It's a more veteran group out there. Now you're bringing in Tania Latson, the nation's leading scorer. This is a group that needed that go-to bucket. And Mylasia was that at times for South Carolina, but at other times was not as consistently as Dawn Staley would have wanted, hence the sort of up and down minutes that Mylasia got this year. But yeah, it'll be interesting. I think both her and Tessa Johnson, sort of those dynamic guards coming off the bench for South Carolina, we'll see sort of how everything shakes out with minutes there.
And then you think about teams that were in that Elite Eight conversation and are dropping. USC, of course, is expected to be without JuJu Watkins for a significant portion of the year.
And
Notre
they lost
Dame,
Heckle and Howell to the portal. I think
I was just going to say, and they lost a huge shooter in Avery Howell, and Heckle. That was a floor settle for them. So that's going to be interesting to see how USC bounces back from that. Jazzy Davidson, saw her during the McDonald's All-American game. She's phenomenal don't know if that's going to be enough. Then, Notre Dame. That's the spookiness. We don't know what the heck is going on over in South Bend. They're big time names. Obviously, Olivia Miles signs to TCU or commits to TCU, but they've also lost Kate Koval. And there's just that was supposed to be the next generation big after Maddie Westbeld. And so you're looking at them falling, and then TCU. The reason
TBD.
why they did so, they're TBD. Of course, they get Olivia Miles, but there's nobody else left. They lost a lot of senior talent. Of course, Donovan Hunter is still going to be there alongside Olivia, but this
and they got Clara Silva from
interesting.
Kentucky. So in terms of that high pick and roll.
Oh, yes. Okay. I forgot about that. That's big. Okay.
So they have 6'7". So they retained a presence. Clara didn't play a ton at Kentucky this year. She played behind Claire Strack. But she is 6'6", 6'7". She's tall. She has that inside presence. Didn't play a lot, but 3 years of eligibility remaining with TCU. They've got a decent group there. And in terms of the Kate Koval to LSU, I did want to say, it didn't. When she went into the portal, LSU had been a finalist for her before, and having gotten to know her and her family really well over the last year, I was like, her older brother is at LSU, and I think as well the post-development that LSU has, what they had done with Anissa Morrow, Angel Reese, obviously dating back further, but to work with Bob Starkey and Simone Augustus in that staff. But, her older brother's there, and you can hear more about sort of her story, but I think sort of that connection to home was big.
Of course. All right. Well, now let's talk about the fact that there's not going to be a Paige Bueckers playing college basketball next year. And for a significant portion of the year, no JuJu Watkins. So we got to look at the star power around the NCAA. Of course, Sarah Strong comes to mind. But Sarah Strong's game speaks for itself. She doesn't do much speaking. And when you think about stars and you think about swagger, you think about who you want to kind of lock in with, it is usually someone that has more of a voice. Paige Bueckers was one of the most vocal players that we've seen in a long time in terms of not only being vocal and articulate and eloquent about how she played about basketball, but who she was as a person, her being an ally to folks.
Story.
I mean, just telling her story. That's been the case for all of these superstars, Angel Reese and Caitlin Clark. That's what makes you gravitate towards these folks. And so I'm looking at Sarah Strong, I'm looking at AZ, I'm looking at Madison Booker, Hannah Hidalgo, Lauren Betts, Flau'jae still in the mix. Malaysia we just talked about. When you think about stepping into that void, what sorts of qualities and attributes do you need both on and off the court to try to get to the level of the Paige and the JuJus?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think of JuJu as being a super huge extrovert, nor do I think of Paige being that way.
Sure.
So I don't think with someone like Sarah Strong, it's not as though she needs to completely change her personality in order to become an NIL star. And frankly, what we talked about with the settlement, she might, whatever she's receiving from UConn in terms of rev share, she might not need to sort of think into that NIL space. But stars drive the game forward. So when we're thinking about who is sort of the face of women's college basketball next season, like you said, Flau'jae has been a face of women's college basketball. She was all over our TVs through March, not just during the games. Every commercial. I'm like, oh my gosh, we should have her on to talk about finances because she has talked about it in the commercial. She definitely would be able to school us. Yeah, she'd be able to school us on that for sure. And she's more extroverted. Obviously, she's a performer. So she has that going for her. She's got great stage presence, but JuJu isn't super extroverted. But she definitely talks more than Sarah Strong, just in terms of her post-game press conferences. And I think that's part of it is that JuJu has, and during her freshman year, shared her story a bit more than Sarah did this year. I went to stores at the beginning of the season and sat down with Sarah and was like, oh, this is going to be a challenge to get, you sit down sometimes with players and it's you're asking the first few questions and it's it was like a press conference with her where I'm like, tell me a little bit about, your story. And I'm asking her questions and it's 5-word answers. And I'm like, okay, got it. I need to work harder here. I need to be better here at my job. But I think there will need to be a level of that. And I think UConn is a pretty good place to help a player sort of come into that, Sue Bird is someone that wasn't quite like her freshman year wasn't going to sort of take over the mantle, and it was a different era. But like finding your voice, sharing your story, showing who you are, you don't have to like be totally out there 100% of the time. But I do think, she will have to, Gino will have to coach her up a little more, like as he was in the press conferences, or CD or someone on that staff, and just in terms of sharing her story a bit. And maybe that's not, maybe that's not a part of her college story. Maybe it's not. But I do think Flau'jae is big. I'm curious with Tenaya Latson going to South Carolina. This is
right.
Best South.
She's kind of been hiding in the bottom corner of the country,
right? Like that platform
people don't know
you
about
get
her
by
as much as they should.
Right, by being a Gamecock, having more of her game, like ACC versus SEC, having more of her games televised on like ESPN and ABC with that South Carolina schedule. Sort of having that 1 year with the Gamecocks, being a scorer, sort of thinking about the highlights that she will be putting on, and we don't know their schedule yet, but like against those opponents, like I think Tenaya is someone that I'm really excited about. we were sort of hearing like South Carolina or USC. I thought both could be good fits in different ways for her, but I think Tenaya and Flau'jae sort of feel like the two front runners with Sarah Strong and AZ Fudd. I mean, AZ has her friendship and her mentorship with Steph Curry, and I feel like that's going to continue to blossom over this next year, and she'll be put in more positions to sort of have opportunities with NIL as well.
And I hate to say this, but there is some, I don't know, there's truth in this. With AZ having that relationship and Malaysia having that relationship with Curry, it expands the visibility, right? So when Steph is wearing Malaysia Fulwiley's jersey as he's walking into his NBA games, that's a big deal. As Kevin Durant is calling out Madison Booker, who wears number 35 at Texas, like Kevin Durant did, like that adds another level of visibility in terms of making them these big time stars. And AZ Fudd is already the people's princess on top of already having this relationship and this connection to, Steph Curry. So I think that level of transcending women's basketball into the basketball sphere in general is going to be huge. But do you think it really matters to have one superstar like Caitlin Clark was, and Caitlin versus Angel or Paige? Like, does it matter to have one?
And there's a lot of oxygen in the room, and I think it can go to a lot of places. You think to sort of those, like the documentaries last year, Full Court Press, it was Caitlin Clark, Camille Cardoso, and Kiki Rice. Only one of those players came back this year. Next year, or, coming back next year, but in this year's documentary, it's Flau'jae, Hannah Hidalgo, and Kiki Iriafen. So two of those players will be coming back. So I think people will have an opportunity to sort of see these journeys of both Hannah Hidalgo and Flau'jae, which, we haven't talked about Hannah yet, but she's someone that like dynamic on and off the court, sort of you can't take your eyes off her. Those big plays, the highlights, Notre Dame will have a good schedule, lots of games on NBC, nationally televised. So, and I think Notre Dame, like we said, with sort of the exodus of players, will be an intriguing storyline heading into the year. People will have questions, and I think when people have questions, they tune in. So I think those aspects too, where it's like people will have a chance to get to know Flau'jae and Hannah as well through this documentary, which can carry into next year and sort of give them that extra boost in their, I guess, platform, if that's how we want to call it.
Yeah. No, anytime there's a little drama, things are just elevated. I think and I feel like I've seen that clip a million times of Hannah Hidalgo saying, "I hate losing more than I like winning." And it's like, ooh, okay. I wanted to, you just want to tune in because there's a little bit of like a drama around it. We talked about, Tenaya Latson. You said that this is an opportunity for her to potentially jump up into the atmosphere of basketball, the stratosphere. But Olivia Miles at TCU could also, you think about what happened with Haley Van Lith and her redemption arc that played out at TCU. Any other big names that have kind of jumped out to you regarding the transfer portal that are still in there? You're kind of looking and waiting to see what they're going to do?
I think Cody McMahon comes to mind first and foremost.
That's a good one.
Ohio State star from the state of Ohio, went there because she wanted her mom to be able to still come to a bunch of her games. So really curious, like I can see her fitting in at a lot of different places, like USC, needs a big. LSU, very fun. Fits, but not necessarily close to Ohio. So we'll see if that
Right.
sort of remains 3 years later. Sort of something that tilts the scale for her. Also, Sarah Williams is a name that people might not know as well because she played at Wisconsin. So not a team that has regularly or ever been in the top 25 over the last few years while she's been there. But 2024 Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year, athletic 6'4" post who can be, just the anchor of the paint for a program. And I think of all those teams that might be looking for literally exactly that, or how they can add to it. Like literally take your pick of any of these programs that are in the top 10. I've got to think they're in on Sarah Williams. And so those are two people that when I think about how they can tilt a program in terms of becoming a riser, is like, if you can land Cody, if you can land Sarah, it's a pretty good place to start.
Yeah, Cody's an interesting one because it will depend on how she's used. Cody could be a big. She's 6 feet tall. She has unbelievable post moves, but she also could be just a stretch wing too. She developed her 3-point game a little bit more this season. Her shooting got a lot better. So very interesting to see where she lands for sure. Okay. Now, Chantel, you've been on the road all season. You get a little bit of a pause this offseason to finally just be at home and chill for a second. But I know you've racked up some really great memories while you've been on the road, and you've observed a lot. And so I just wanted to talk and ask you, like, before we close out college basketball space and dive right into WNBA season, what are some, let's say, your top 5 moments this year, whether it's lessons learned or things you observed or interviews you were a part of? Like, what were some things that were highlights?
Gosh, top 5. I'll just go like a group of 5, or maybe like 5 thoughts that I'm having.
Sure.
One, I will always think of this year as sort of the year that I thought a lot about money in terms of basketball. Like, we had conversations about NIL, rev share. This feels like a year of NIL for me. We talked about, with the CBA changing for the WNBA, there was finally a conversation of like, are players going to stay at the college level? Or are they going to wait a year to go to the WNBA? And, sort of those conversations I will think about a lot. I will think about the Final Four this year, how, it didn't put up the numbers of last year overall, but it's still in my mind it's still on the up and up. It's still on the upswing. It's still moving forward. A South Carolina UConn final was sort of this like perfect ending to a season that, to see Dawn and Gino on the sideline in that game, it was, having been at the Minneapolis 2022 final, felt very poetic to sort of see it come back again, and knowing sort of what Paige and AZ have been through in that time since. Gosh, what other moments stand out? I mean, I think I'll remember the season sort of like, it'll be the postseason of like, what if with JuJu? Like, what if she hadn't gotten hurt? Like, how does that change things? But also everything she did up until that point, like how basketball in LA, maybe that's my number 3, like LA basketball. I'm so jealous of Sabreena that she gets to be there.
I know.
Like to have the epicenter, I guess multiple epicenters of women's college basketball, but like to have UCLA and USC in the top 4 to 5 throughout basically the whole season, and to both be in LA is pretty dang cool. What about you? Anything else that I'm missing?
No, I think conference realignment was really interesting for me this year.
RIP Pac-12.
The Pac-12, like those teams heading into their new conferences and doing relatively well. I thought that was pretty cool to see. For me, I have a lot of personal moments. Like, I got to cover my first Final Four this year. I thought that was really special, and just be able to be a part of it. Got to sit in the same spaces as some of the greats of basketball, listening to Gino and Dawn in their post-game press conferences. I was kind of like having a pinch me moment of like, this is awesome. I think this is also going to be a year for me of like, was it parody? Because all season long, we got duped. We got tricked into thinking that things might be just a little bit more spread out than it actually was. And that tournament told us completely different. So I think that was really, really cool overall. But, well, I think this was a great year overall for women's college basketball, and appreciate all of you guys that have been listening and commenting and letting us know what you guys want to hear about and things of that sort. I still remember like one of our very first comments this season, like, can you talk a little bit more about Michigan? And just
I think
like,
we have.
it's like, yeah,
I think we have.
We absolutely have. But no, we appreciate all of you guys that have been reading and listening all season long. So that is it for today. We will be back on your feed on Friday to get you guys ready for the WNBA draft, which is literally on Monday, y'all. This is crazy. If you're new here, hit that follow.
No off season.
There's no off season. Right. Exactly. That's what the show means, y'all. This literally. If you're new here, hit that follow button wherever you're listening so you can stay up to date with us. And if you want, come find us on YouTube and please reach out to us. As I mentioned, we do read the comments. Spotify, on Apple, on Twitter, on BlueSky,
YouTube,
Twitter X, whatever. YouTube, we leave them. We will be reading, we'll be listening, and we'll be making sure that we talk about the things that you guys want to talk about. And also, you can leave us a rating, let us know. 5 stars, nothing less. Thank you. And all of us, know it helps us help other people find us. So do your job, help us get to more people. As always, don't forget, there's always more to be found at the Yahoo Sports Hub. So check it out, sports.yahoo.com/women-sports. On behalf of The Athletic, I'm Zena Kata. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for tuning in to No Off Season. To hear more, be sure to like and subscribe. We drop new episodes every Tuesday and Friday.